It snowed here last night, Rob.
It did. Wow.
Yeah, we had a huge rainstorm. I mean, it was raining all day, and last night it just poured. And I woke up not expecting to see white. I mean, granted, it was just a dusting, but it was so like,
Still,
yeah, I was like, I didn't realize it'd gotten that cold. So anyway, kind of surprising.
we had our first dusting probably about I think a week or two ago. And what we had last night was high winds, heavy rain, and then one of those things in the middle of the night, power goes out, the kind of alarm sensor's going off, and then you hear like we have a couple of these vases out in front of the door for Christmas decor and whatnot.
Right.
And you hear like a boom, boom, and it's like those things just went down. There's a wreath that hangs.
Did they break? Did they break?
They thankfully they're made out of like a heavy plastic material.
Good.
So thankfully, yeah, they didn't crack or anything like that.
Man, what a storm!
It was heavy. And the thing was, the winds got up to about 60 miles per hour. So it was intensive last night. Yikes. I'm just happy it wasn't snow.
and I said we had snow, but it was like a dusting. So, but it was still a shock.
Now I see a little like stocking Christmas decor hanging off the back there and the guitar there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have,
nice.
tried to, anyway, yes, I have tried to put decorations up in the house. I haven't done lights outside or gotten a tree yet, but I'm getting
the holiday
started.
Spirit.
And so, I had all these boxes from my old house of all these decorations, right? And so I was going through the boxes and I culled through, okay, I have like 3 boxes of stuff I'm ready to donate. I have them in the car. Yesterday got together with the kids here in Richmond and I was telling Amy and Sarah and I was like, hey, I got a lot of stuff I can donate, from the Christmas stuff. I culled through it. It's like, Amy looks at me, you are not donating a thing until we look at it. No, I don't think you want any of this. Don't donate anything, Dad. We've got to look at it before you throw it away.
Could be memories in there. You don't know how each of them, feel about things.
Come on. Please let it go. Let it go. Anyway. All right, let's get to it.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. Rob and Stan here. We got a great discussion on the topic of data security. But before we do that, Stan, you're fresh off of an event last week and wanted to kind of just get your thoughts on how things went overall.
Yeah, hopefully that was the last trip I have to take this month. So as we're wrapping up the year, I was down in Texas, had the opportunity to visit our Dallas office, and then drove down to Houston for the cybersecurity event. I love the way in which they are the cybersecurity summit.
Nice.
Down in Houston. And
so that's the one to go to then, apparently.
Apparently, I love the fact that they make it so pronounced. And so I had a presentation down there, and one of the topics, this is nothing new, but it was a really good panel, I thought, on ransomware. And it is the pain point that everybody's concerned about. There is no silver bullet. Mm-hmm. It is likely that bad actors are going to attempt to lock up your data and extort money from you. And the technique now is also the 1-2 whammy of not only encrypting your data, but also extracting that data, extricating that data out of your environment and blackmailing you with that as well, saying we'll release this data if you don't pay. And so it is a 1-2 whammy. And one of the things that they talked about, obviously, is the need for backups, but to have a tiered storage strategy for your backup architecture. The fact that if one of those layers gets compromised, you may have the ability to back up from a previous layer. Now, granted, the other concern is making sure that the bad actors are aware of what you're trying to do, right? And so they're looking at compromising your backups. They're looking at, they may have had the dwell time in your environment to get into your backup cycle. So you have to be conscious of the fact that some of these backups may be corrupted.
That's right.
But when you think about the tiers, you have the high frequency access tier. This is the most susceptible to ransomware, right? Mm-hmm. But then you could have offline or air gapped tiers. And these are the ones that are disconnected from your network and could be like in the old days, tape backups or some kind of removable drives, something that enables you to have confidence that if you're infected, you can take this air gap backup and restore. And if you think about some of the recent attacks like PokerStars and MoveIt, those that had these air gap systems were able to restore without having to pay a ransom. And then you could leverage cloud. There are a number of different things you can do. But I think that was a very valid point in this day and age, that you need to not be assuming that your approach today is going to be adequate for tomorrow. You need to be really looking at how to architect in today's, honestly, very active threat environment in this context of ransomware.
Yeah, no, that's a great lead in also into the topic of data security that we want to kind of delve into today, right? Because if you think about it, that whole situation is very difficult, but one of the elements that's really important in this whole thing is understanding really what is the sensitive data for the organization, right? And that could range from, of course, it could be customer information, right? Patient information, depending on what vertical you're in, your own intellectual property. There's all sorts of different types of data, but it comes down to really understanding what it is before you even figure out to kind of point out and search where it may actually exist, right? Mm-hmm. We did was it 2 months or so ago now, I think it was, we did a webinar with Forrester, and this was the whole topic. It was really actually, Forrester had just come out with their wave on the data security platform market space. So I was able to speak with the analyst there, Heidi Shea, on the topic. And the key element of it always centered back to the technology capabilities that are there to help the program around data security, but many kind of misstep right out of the gates because they try to just kind of launch the technology out there to do what they think is kind of the work for them without having the front end of kind of what I say the equation taken care of. Whereas let's go have these conversations we need to with the different business stakeholders, because the relative information sets or data sets that they have are different from their peers in the other business units, for example. And they need to understand kind of what should they be looking for. So kind of create that almost catalog of the data elements, the sensitivity of those data elements, to then begin that process of actually leveraging some technology.
And get agreement on what should be done to protect the different levels of sensitivity. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things, so I have a flashback to my days when I used to support the Defense Department. And they have a very well understood classification system.
They do, yes.
I mean, so you have confidential, secret, top secret, SCI, meaning compartmentalized. And you in that world, you can have an accreditation to authorization to operate your system. And the most simplistic approach is, well, whatever the highest level of data that's being processed, you need to apply the controls to protect the entire system that way. It's sort of like a peanut butter approach of, all right, if you're processing top secret, your assumption is your system is top secret, and therefore the controls that you need to have in place for a top secret system are applied. Mm-hmm. And so the motivation to go to multi-level security was, it's a lot of work to apply all those strict controls onto everything. And so the value of multi-level was, okay, well, if I can say that all these systems are unclassified, or all these components of the system are unclassified, I don't have to apply that same rigor to those systems. And you take this to the business world, if you are not doing the classification of your data and the categorization, you sort of have to assume that system high approach.
Yeah.
Are you really going to apply the all the protections that you need to protect that IP that you have in that one or two systems, because you haven't done the work to figure out where that IP is exposed?
Right.
So I mean, it's one of those things that's sort of like, either you go all in, and that may be simpler if you really don't have the ability to get a handle on where your data is in your environment and the sensitive data is, then you sort of have to assume, as the security side, all right, the business isn't doing the work, I guess I need to go ahead and assume that it's exposed everywhere.
Right. it's one of those factors where a lot of these kind of drivers for the organizations to actually do something in this space around data security, really data discovery, classification, and then security data has been around privacy regulations that we've been seeing, right? You see the breaches occurring and now they're like, okay, we need to take some action. I'll tell you, the one we've talked about recently and actually goes into effect here very shortly on December 18th is the SEC ruling. And how many conversations I've had recently where the organization is saying, hey, we actually need to really understand what we have for data because of the SEC cyber ruling, right? And so that interconnection point of, again, here's another kind of hammer that's getting, driving that nail into the need to do this is helping move this thing in the right direction.
I do think the action that you take varies as far as, okay, you understand where your sensitive data is. Going back to your first point, if your policy indicates that access controls are sufficient, then make sure you apply those. I mean, and you have to do reviews, and it's going to be a continuous review because things change so rapidly. That the access controls to that sensitive data are applied appropriately, and that you are validating on a continuous basis that they are. If you are in some kind of compliance situation like PCI data, and you have to tokenize that data, then there are plenty of solutions that can help you with that, including ours, right?
Right.
And then encryption, again, back in the day, we had this perception of the firewall and the crunchy exterior protecting your environment. Once you were in, you were a trusted user and your data was accessible to those that had that kind of access within the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the threat landscape today, you can't have that assumption. You got to change that model to a defense in depth, including encryption for your most sensitive data.
No, for sure. I mean, again, we have all these different environments, the multi-cloud environments, the cloud data warehouses. Where does this data exist? But I want to go back to the point that you just called out, which is extremely important. I've seen way too many times where the organization maybe has kind of the beginning stages of a discovery and classification program underway, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as they're identifying this data, you kind of called it out. What actions are you taking in this data, right? And that's lacking. And it's just the way kind of in the marketplace, there's been some capabilities that have been out there to help them with the discovery, but then they're kind of like, now it's up to you. You go figure out to do something with something else as a solution to help you. But, what it does, honestly, is it presents great opportunity for organizations in many facets. One is, as they're going through that exercise of discovering what's actually out there, they're uncovering so many kind of these, secrets, if you will, out there that they didn't realize existed. This application still exists. This data is still sitting out there. Why? Right? It might have been through M&A activity, and they've pulled it in and just basically said, well, look, let's just let it run. What does that do? That's another level of risk for the organization. Clean up. Right. And so going through that process of the discovery phase, understanding that these things actually exist out there is an opportunity, right, for them to be able to pull back and say, okay, I can reduce my risk, of course, but also reduce my costs associated to that data being out there. Never mind, unfortunately, if we got breached, then that data is actually part of what got breached, right? Shame on us for that.
I view this for like toxic data. I mean, data is not being used by the business units, but it's still there, it still resides, and may still have sensitive data in it. To your point, the threat actors don't care.
Oh, no, of course not. They've got what they need.
Right. I mean, and also, honestly, that also could be that the controls that you normally would be putting in place in those systems or that data repository aren't there either because you aren't focused on it, but it's still active. It's still resident in your system. I think another thing that came up in the conference last week, of course, probably in your event as well, AI. And the challenge in this context is the potential to ingest information into your models that's sensitive, and you don't necessarily want the AI models to be exposed to that data or be using it. You want it to be anonymized. And that cleansing activity is becoming more important as these business units rush to the market with different AI solutions or leveraging AI in their way of becoming more efficient. And I think the other aspect of this, which is not necessarily a security issue, but I think it's very important, is bias and understanding that the data that you're feeding into your AI could create biases. And again, to some degree, that is understanding what that data is to make sure that you are not, by default, creating a bias because you haven't thought through what's being ingested.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up because, yes, the event I attended, actually, my talk was on AI, and it was basically entitled Amplifying Cybersecurity with AI. And it was just genuine, like, here's what we're seeing out there as actual kind of work that we're doing, right, within our own business. But the use case you just discussed is one that is like very important. You talk about clients that kind of refer to as the sanitized data within the large language models that you're using, right? Because it's a major concern. The bias aspect is a critical concern. We can kind of start with looking at it from a sensitive data because we know how to do that, right? But now that next level of how do you understand really where, it is biased or not is going to get to be really interesting. We should actually do a whole kind of episode on the AI topic relative to, these areas of what can we really do today and what are the gaps that we're seeing at this point in time that maybe we start need to, looking at.
That flashback I had about my days supporting the DoD, which was back in the 80s, reminds me that we've gone through this transition in what we call what we do, right? It was initially called computer security.
Yeah.
And then it went to information security or information assurance. And then now we call it cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that transition has helped, I guess, us forget sometimes that we really are ultimately trying to protect that information. We call it cybersecurity, but really that name of, that terminology of information security, information assurance nails it a bit better because we are trying to ultimately in our organizations, our enterprises, protect our data. And that takes many different facets. Mm-hmm. It's a multifaceted problem. And we don't want to lose sight of that.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It does take us back to the reality that it's all about the information, right? And how do we actually protect that data, that information? Data is part of that, but there's other elements that are part of what the information set is all about. So, very interesting, Stan. Good discussion on the topic of, in essence, data security. Data, it takes us obviously kind of through that life cycle of really discovering the data, classifying the data, kind of the governance aspect, the controls aspect you discussed as well, and then how we actually secure it. So, I hope our listeners learned something new from today's discussion. We always love talking about, different topics that are, of course, interesting. We think this is one that's very, very hot right now in many discussions. There's a lot of drive behind it, as we mentioned, and some regulatory actions that are being in effect at this point in time. But again, Stan, always good talking to you, and keep that holiday cheer going, my friend.
I'll try. Take care, Rob.
Take care.
Hello, producer Ben here, and if you want to hear a bit more about data privacy, then there's no need to stray from the Reimagining Cyber podcast. For example, back in episode 28, Stan and Rob had a great conversation with Greg Anderson, Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at broadcasting company EW Scripts.
A role of the Chief Data Officer sitting outside, separate and apart from necessarily IT, as we historically think of it, is going to be extremely important as more and more organizations rightly become cloud forward. That data isn't going to live inside of your four walls, but we need the right processes, tools, and approach to make the data available in the right ways, safely, legally, ethically, to allow the organization to do what it needs to do.
That was Greg Anderson, Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at EW Scripts. It was episode 28, How Data Privacy Drives Business Outcomes. Stan and Rob will be back next week with another top guest from the cybersecurity world. New episodes drop every Wednesday. You can follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Goodbye.